Welcome back to The Line. Communities across New Mexico came together this week in spirit and prayer to support the victims of last weekend's deadly synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. 11 people were killed in the attack by a man who allegedly told police, quote, he just wanted to kill Jews, unquote. Indeed, gun violence, anti-Semitism are, let me just stick with anti-Semitism. It is clearly rising in this country. There can be no dispute about this. And you think about some of the situations we've had here in New Mexico and here in Albuquerque, as a matter of fact, just a little more than a year ago.
Yes.
Where should we be on this right now? It's hard to get our heads around where we could go from here.
Well, there is a huge rise nationwide in these crimes and in bomb threats. We had one last year at the Jewish Community Center.
That's right.
It was one of 17 states. We were one of 17 states that endured these threats, and now, of course, it's come into reality. You know, anti-Semitism is the oldest hate there is, dating back not just centuries, but millennia. And it, unfortunately, has been stoked in this political atmosphere. And I really agree with what the rabbi from Santa Fe said, Rabbi Neil Answich, who said that the Jews who were murdered in Pittsburgh were murdered not just because they were Jews, but because they were obeying one of the tenets of their faith, which was to greet the stranger, to help the stranger and the immigrant. There is a direct line between the murderer who said he felt that the Jews and their organization called HIAS, who welcomed and resettled refugees, Jewish refugees coming in the early 1900s, that they were aiding and abetting the immigrants who were illegally coming into this country. The situation is not helped when you have a president saying that George Soros funded the recent immigrant caravan. These are dog whistles, and there are crazy people out there that take up those dog whistles and follow that direct line against globalists. You know, globalists.
Yes.
You know, in an era of nationalism, no minority is safe, and often the Jews are the canaries in the coal mine. And I think that's what's happening right now.
I agree with you. In fact, Diane Dede mentioned this organization's connection to settling refugees and immigrants that are coming in, and the shooter referenced that in some of his Facebook posts. So there's a connection here, but I want to get to an idea that Dede brought up as well. How should we consider the language that's out there in our public consciousness right now, and as a connection to these kind of heinous crimes? Is there a connection? Is there not a connection? I mean, how much guilt should one take for and it's not just this one person I'm sort of hinting at here. It's a lot of us out there putting things out in the air right now.
I think the language, that everyone's rhetoric could be toned down, regardless of which party affiliation you are or what group you represent. I mean, Louis Farrakhan is still loud and proud in his statements. I think that our president gets a lot of blame for things because if you look at his record, his rhetoric may be strange, but if you look at his record in supporting the Jewish community, I mean, he has been a leader far and above the last 3 presidents. So I think that it's hard to, but I think that his rhetoric could be toned down in a lot of areas. I think the immigration issue is an issue for everybody. I think that's playing a part, and we didn't mention this earlier, in our gubernatorial race. It's certainly playing a part in the second CD. So I think that rhetoric encourages people to latch on to one little phrase and run with it and say, and I think they think they're doing the right thing because they're so twisted in their minds. I have to tell you, a personal connection to Pittsburgh. My father grew up near there. Every time I hear this, my stomach just, and I live 4 blocks from Temple Albert and Congregation Albert. And it was in my Senate district, and I spent a lot of time there. And it does something to me that some of the other tragedies have not done. And I just think that this for me is the last straw. This is the end. If we don't stand up and make a difference, and it's each of us, each of us, don't even joke about anything. Be compassionate, be loving, be generous. That doesn't mean you have to support total immigration. It means that you have to love your fellow man. And it really does break my heart when I see this happening. But I also watched the President and First Lady go, place the rocks of memory on each of the Star of Davids, place the little flowers, paying respect to those 11 individuals.
That's right.
And I don't care if you like Donald Trump or not, the President of the United States and the First Lady went to the scene of the tragedy and paid respect to those who were departed. So I just think we all have to move in that direction.
Fair enough, absolutely. Tom, we've got about 30 seconds for each one of you guys. Touch on that if you would. How does this conversation start, where we kind of turn this thing around in our country? How does that, who's big enough to get all of our attention and get us going on this? It's difficult.
You know, as trite as it might sound, it just starts with the single conversation. You know, if we need to, if we want others to tone down the rhetoric, we have to tone it down ourselves. And you know, it's really as simple as that.
I agree. Laura, would you agree with that as well? Is that the best
I don't think
start?
it's worked so far as Donald Trump goes. I mean, there's a lot of people who have chosen not to use divisive language, and it hasn't changed anything. And you know, I'm struck by what the senator says, Senator Snyder, both senators, about him paying respect. And I think that if he were doing that and then were consistent with his message in terms of respect overall and not divisiveness in his words, then I would have a tremendous amount of respect more for him in terms of his position overall and his responsibility, I think, in the entire conversation. But he doesn't do that. He does the right thing, and in fact, his daughter and son-in-law are observant Jews.
That's right.
So I have no doubt that he's done a lot for the Jewish community. But he also has done a lot to stoke those that nationalism, that white nationalism, that hate. He has, I think, in his rhetoric, in his rallies, in the words that he has said, he has done a lot to empower that fringe group of people. I don't know, I know the incidents have increased, but I'm not sure that the hate itself has not always been there.
Gotcha.
I think what's different is that they feel more empowered now because of what they hear at rallies from the president. And that's something we can't
Well,
ignore.
to remind, we just had a situation on an airplane here in our city where a fellow claimed the president said it's okay to grab women, you know, as we know, and this is what he
It's
said
appalling.
on his arrest, and
Appalling.
it just
That's
wasn't
right.
just out of his head. So
right.
interesting. I have to end that there. When we come back to the table, the line will look at a pair of recent stories that have put the Catholic Church in the election spotlight this year.